So since the governor signed the gun ban and registry in effect, you've had sheriffs across the state of Illinois say they're not going to enforce this. Some counts, it's 90 plus of the 102 county sheriffs that have explicitly said they're not going to enforce this or use their jail resources to jail somebody who has been charged only with violation of the Protect Illinois Communities Act, and that's the name of this legislation that lawmakers passed on the final day of session, and Governor J.B. Pritzker ultimately signed into law, prohibiting the future sale of certain types of semi-automatic guns, rifles, shotguns, handguns, and requiring any of those grandfathered in firearms to be registered with Illinois State Police by January 1st of 2024. But the measure also prohibits the future sale and possession out in the world of magazines with more than 10 rounds for rifles and more than 15 rounds for handguns. This obviously has a lot of pushback. We've talked a lot about the lawsuits. We'll have more conversation about those lawsuits, including a conversation with one of the top plaintiffs from the most recent lawsuit filed by attorney Thomas DeVore in White County. Darren Bailey will join us just after 6:35 here on WMAY, so stay tuned for that. But yesterday you had a news conference that U.S. Congressman Sean Casten held, this in DuPage County, where they were really hammering on the DuPage County Sheriff, James Metrick, and they had a whole slew of different types of people there saying that the DuPage County Sheriff Mendrick, that is James Mendrick, is wrong in saying that he won't enforce the state's gun ban. Mendrick, just one of, again, 90 plus sheriffs across the state that have said similar things about how they're not going to enforce this particular issue or jail somebody if the sole charge they have is violation of this gun ban. But Sean Casten, several other members of Congress, several members of the state legislature held a news event yesterday, and they talked about the sheriff in particular in DuPage County that they said was not upholding his oath. Here is Sean Casten talking a bit about his criticism of the DuPage County sheriff yesterday during this news conference.
I also want to point out that public safety is a two-way street. It depends on law enforcement to enforce the law, but it also depends on public confidence that those laws will be enforced without prejudice and not subject to the whims of a particular officer. Now, I know I speak for all Illinoisans when I say that I want to enjoy my next holiday without fear of getting shot. That I want our police officers to be trusted and respected and safe, and that inaction in the wake of far too many deaths is completely unacceptable. So for all those reasons, I'm proud to be joined here today by members of the Illinois congressional delegation, many of my colleagues at the county level, at the state level, calling on Sheriff Mendrick to immediately rescind his statement, to immediately commit to enforcing the laws that he has taken an oath to uphold. Because if he can't, he's got to resign.
And again, that's Sean Casten yesterday with a slew of other lawmakers from Congress, but also from the State House, critical of the DuPage County Sheriff, James Mendrick. And it's because of the stance that Mendrick took that's similar to a lot of what other sheriffs across the state are saying. Mendrick said in a statement afterwards that there's absolutely nothing that we are doing or not doing that would make mass shootings more accessible in DuPage County, he wrote, in response to Casten. In fact, he says, I've asked on multiple occasions to increase penalties on all existing gun crimes, but it does not appear that they want that having in part of the conversation. So Mendrick responding to Casten and these other lawmakers who are critical of him. But that's because he, again, said that he's not going to enforce this. Now, the rhetoric also continued with U.S. Representative Raja Krishnamurthy yesterday as well, with Casten and others sounding off on his criticism of the DuPage County Sheriff. And again, this is from yesterday during a news conference.
Saturday night, a Cobra M11 9mm pistol with 30-round magazines was apparently used in the shooting. Now, that type of pistol...
And he's talking about the shooting over in California over the weekend.
is not only illegal in California, but that assault weapon would be illegal here. Now imagine if a law enforcement official had the opportunity to enforce a law that could have prevented the sale, the purchase, or use of that particular pistol or assault weapon in that particular mass shooting, and it did not happen. We would be outraged. We would demand the resignation and indeed the prosecution of the person who did not enforce the law to prevent that mass shooting. And yet that is what we're confronted with right now. Do we need another mass shooting that would have resulted from the dereliction of duty in DuPage County to prompt us to action? I say no.
Again, that's Raja Krishnamurthy joining Sean Casten yesterday, and I just want to reiterate what DuPage County Sheriff James Mendrick said in a statement after this news conference. He said that there's absolutely nothing we are doing or not doing that would make a mass shooting more accessible in DuPage County. In fact, I've asked on multiple occasions to increase penalties on all existing gun crimes, but it does not appear that they want to have that conversation. But also interesting, Krishnamurthy talking about, essentially law enforcement not doing their job and how if they don't enforce the laws, they should be held accountable, including fired or possibly even charged. Does he have that same sentiment when it comes to Illinois State Police and that clear and present danger reports that they did not act upon when the suspect of the Highland Park shooting was applying for a firearm owner identification card in late 2019, early 2020? Did Illinois State Police get held accountable or anybody get prosecuted whenever they did not follow up with the Aurora warehouse shooter back in 2019 after they discovered that he had a felony in a different state when he was applying for a concealed carry license? No, they did not follow through with the current state law and enforce that to the Illinois State Police, nor did they follow through with the clear and present danger report. But one last little bit here from a state representative who was at the event with Sean Casten on Monday in DuPage County. You had State Representative Ann Stava Murray. She sounded off as well, saying that, hey, she's got people who support the Second Amendment saying that they like a ban on certain types of weapons.
Even my Second Amendment supporters, who I spoke with when I talked about an assault weapons ban and banning large capacity magazines, those residents of DuPage were okay with it too. So what we're really talking about is our sheriff taking a very extreme position, willfully misunderstanding the law, creating straw man arguments to not enforce the law, and we are here to dispel all of those today.
So she says that their sheriff's taking an extreme stance, and I don't know if you can say one sheriff joining more than 90 others, the vast majority of sheriffs across the state of Illinois, 102 counties with more than 90 sheriffs saying that they're not going to enforce this law. I don't know if you can say that that's an extreme stance. I think that you could say that seems to be the consensus among sheriffs across the state, that they are not going to enforce this, seeing it as an unconstitutional law. Now, somebody did share with me a paper that I want to pull up here and just briefly touch on. And this is from a article titled Enforce Unconstitutional Laws at Your Own Peril. It's by Captain Maurice Bostic, Esquire. Courts examine qualified immunity for law enforcement officers who enforce laws that violate rights guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. It goes on to talk about police officers invoking qualified immunity by relying on statutes that authorize their conduct, but not in the statutes is obviously unconstitutional. It goes on to say that defendants, they responded in one case that officials were simply enforcing a statute, but the court held that some statutes are so obviously unconstitutional as to require officials to second-guess the legislature and refuse to enforce unconstitutional statutes or face a lawsuit for damages if they don't. In other words, the article finishes up here. It says, in other words, law enforcement officers can't rely on an existing statute to make arrests if the statute is obviously unconstitutional. So even when legislatures believe a statute to be constitutional, officers must be better at their jobs and more knowledgeable about constitutional law. So I think the takeaway there is that law enforcement, especially elected sheriffs who have a duty to their constituents on a local level in a county, are not only responsible to ensure that their constitutional rights of their citizens aren't being violated, but also a fiduciary duty to make sure that they're not doing something that's going to cross lines and have the county liable for penalties, for monetary damages for violating an individual's rights. And the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is indeed one of those fundamental constitutional civil rights. So interesting to see those arguments presented yesterday in DuPage County. And obviously, we're going to hear a lot more about that in the future.